The world shattered around me when I heard the words tumble from Dean's lips through the thin bedroom door. I'm leaving Ariel for Cassidy. It's over between us. My breath caught in my throat as the phone clattered to the hardwood floor, Dean's voice still echoing in the empty hallway. I strained to listen, my heart pounding violently against my ribs. "Don't try to talk me out of this," he said dismissively. "My mind is made up. Cassidy is my future now." Tears stung my eyes as a torrent of emotions crashed over me. Anger, shock, denial. I wanted to scream, to shatter every plate and vase, to make him feel my anguish. But my legs trembled beneath me, robbing my body of strength. The door swung open, and Dean startled, clearly not expecting me there. A flash of guilt flickered across his face before the mask of indifference slipped back into place. "You lying, cheating bastard!" I exploded, hurling the closest object, a heavy marble bookend, directly at his head. He ducked just in time, the bookend smashing into the wall. "Ariel, calm down and let me explain." "Explain what?" I screamed, my vision blurring with tears. "That you've been screwing that little whore behind my back?" Dean opened his mouth, but I cut him off, grabbing fistfuls of his shirt and slamming him against the wall. "How could you do this to me, to our family?" I shoved him harder with each syllable. 20 years together, did it mean nothing? Of course it meant something, but things change. He shoved me off, jaw clenched with anger. "Cassidy understands me in a way you never could." The mocking, callous words lanced through my heart. I wanted to collapse, to wake from this nightmare. But it was all too real. "I'm not the same naive girl you married," I said, steeling my voice. "If you walk out that door, I swear on my life you'll regret it." Dean scoffed derisively. "What are you going to do, Ariel? It's over." He grabbed his coat and headed for the stairs. "Don't make this any uglier than it needs to be." I watched Dean's car pull out of the driveway, the red brake lights glaring through my tear-blurred eyes. The finality of it all slammed into me, forcing me to my knees on the cold foyer tiles. How could the man I loved, the father of my children, discard me so callously? Numb, I stumbled to the couch and grabbed my phone with a trembling hand. I needed my brother Greg. He would know how to handle this. After 2 rings, his concerned voice came through the line. "Ariel? What's wrong?" "It's Dean." My voice cracked as I recounted walking in on his conversation. "He's leaving me for another woman." There was a pause before Greg spoke, his tone hardening to steel. "That lying son of a bitch, I'll kill him." "No, please," I interjected quickly, dreading more violence. "I need your help, your legal expertise. He can't be allowed to walk all over me like this." "You're damn right, sis," Greg declared fiercely. "We're going to burn him to the ground. He'll regret the day he ever betrayed you." The utter certainty in my brother's words finally allowed me to exhale. With Greg fighting for me, I could stay strong and weather this nightmare. By the next morning, my shock had churned into a simmering anger. Dean thought he could toss me aside for some bimbo half my age? I would make him choke on his arrogance. The doorbell rang and I answered to find Greg, resolute and carrying a box full of files. "Straight to business," he said, striding inside. I had a PI dig into Dean's affairs, while I subpoenaed his corporate records. He upended the box, scattering documents across the table. "Look at this. He's been filtering money from his real estate deals into offshore accounts. Likely for that actress tramp." I rifled through the damning paperwork, my rage solidifying into icy determination. "That snake, he's been lying to me about everything." "It gets worse," Greg said grimly. "I also found photos of them getting cozy at nightclubs, quince parties, you name it. He's flaunting their affair to the world." White-hot hatred lanced through me at the thought of Dean pawing at that woman in public. I wanted to annihilate them both. "What now?" I asked, jaw clenched. Greg's eyes burned with protective fury. "Now we plan our counterattack and organize all this evidence. He's going to regret ever crossing you, Ari." Plans for ruination began taking shape in my mind. For years, Dean had made a fool of me while living a double life. No more. If it was war he wanted, I would bury him without a shred of mercy. The next morning, Greg and I decided to pay a visit to Dean's estranged mother, Joyce. At 68 years old, the ornery woman possessed a wealth of information about Dean's shadier business dealings. "Joyce, it's been too long," Greg said as she ushered us into her tastefully decorated home. Her eyes immediately narrowed at the sight of me. I see you've brought the traitorous son's wife, she said with disdain. I told Dean that marriage would end in heartache. I bristled at her accusatory tone. With all due respect, your son is the cheating liar who learned it from his father, Joyce finished, silencing me with a raised hand. You think you know betrayal? That snake abandoned me with a newborn to run off with his secretary. The derision seemed to drain from Joyce as her eyes grew haunted. Dean watched it happen as a boy. I raised him to be cutthroat in business, so he'd never be taken advantage of. Greg looked at me meaningfully. We'd uncovered a potential key to understanding Dean's psyche, which is why I wasn't surprised when he started doing underhanded deals behind my back, Joyce continued, shaking her head slowly. He always had that hunger for money and power, just like his father. What kind of deals? Greg pressed urgently. Joyce waved a hand dismissively. This and that. Tax evasion, selling properties to fake LLCs he controlled, skimming from construction funds. My mouth went dry. Dean's criminal misconduct was even deeper than we'd realized. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, Joyce said ominously. He once showed me a folder with pages of incriminating info, enough to bury him for decades if it was leaked. Greg and I exchanged a look. This was it, our chance to obliterate Dean. Where is this file now? I spoke up, keeping my voice steady despite the thunderous pounding of my heart. Joyce's eyes flicked up pensively. Let me think. I believe it's in his study at home, tucked away in a hollowed-out book. A cruel smile twisted my lips. Of course Dean would hide it in plain sight, confident his secret was safe. Thank you, Joyce, I said with false sweetness. You've been more helpful than you can imagine. On the way home, my mind raced with possibilities. If we could locate Dean's file of damaging information, he would be utterly defenseless against me. I could dismantle his life and empire piece by wretched piece. Greg seemed to read my thoughts. Don't get ahead of yourself, Ari. Let's get the file first before making any moves. When we do, that bastard won't know what hit him, I stated coldly. Years of lies and disrespect had fractured my heart, but as the shards wept, a newfound strength was taking hold, one that would ensure Dean's downfall. With the location of Dean's secret file narrowed down, Greg and I wasted no time putting the next phase of our plan into motion. If he thought he could discard me so casually, I would make him pay dearly. I've got a PI keeping close tabs on Dean and his little actress, Greg told me over the phone. He's been documenting their dates around town. A ugly smirk crossed my lips. Perfect. Start leaking it to the gossip media. I want that whore's reputation utterly destroyed. Consider it done, Greg replied with relish. We'll make her radioactive in this town. Over the next few days, the steady drumbeat of embarrassing exposés began hitting the tabloids. There was Cassidy stumbling out of a club at 3 a.m., reeking of booze, lurking behind an overflowing dumpster for a suspiciously timed rendezvous at Dean's high-rise, caught in a nasty drunken spat while valet workers looked on. Each revelation was like a core shot to her budding acting career. Suddenly, the ingenue flavor of the month was being branded as a shameless party girl and homewrecker. Offers started drying up as respectable studios began distancing themselves. The deluge of sordid stories clearly blindsided Dean. One afternoon, my phone rang with his number on the caller ID. "What the hell are you playing at?" he growled as I accepted the call. "Cassidy is getting utterly crucified out there," I laughed, taking perverse delight in his anger. "Did you think I would just roll over, Dean? You want to marry that tramp, be my guest, but she won't be booking any more roles when I'm done." "You're being a vindictive, spiteful bitch," he spat. "Says the man who cheated on his wife of 20 years and threw it in my face," I countered coldly. "I'm just getting started, Dean. This is your penance for years of lies." I could hear his molars grind over the line as his rage simmered. "You're going to regret this, Ariel. I'll make your life a living." Chuckling, I quickly ended the call before his idle threats could dampen my gleeful satisfaction. Let him stew in impotent anger. I was just warming up. My phone buzzed moments later with a text from Greg. "Just got a tip that Cassidy is getting dropped by her agency. The role of a lifetime, gone in smoke." I smiled widely, picturing the arrogant little tart's crestfallen face as her dreams of stardom imploded around her. Maybe she would realize that sleeping with a married man had consequences. My moment of vengeful bliss was interrupted by the ringing doorbell. Opening it revealed a distraught Cassidy, clearly reeling from her fall. You did this to me, she gasped, tears of rage streaking her makeup. You engineered this whole media smear campaign. I crossed my arms coolly. You're just now realizing that? Maybe you should have thought twice about sleeping with my husband and destroying my family. Cassidy's mouth opened and closed as she struggled for a rebuttal. Finally, her expression twisted with hateful loathing. You're going to pay for this, you psychotic bitch! I'm just getting started, sweetie, I replied with a saccharine smile. This is what happens when you gamble with a woman's family. Whirling away, Cassidy fled down the driveway in stunned defeat. I lingered in the doorway, savoring this small victory. If she thought this was merciless, she had no idea what was still to come. A few days after my confrontation with Cassidy, Greg called with an update that made my heart race. I've got it, Ari, he said, voice tense with anticipation, Dean's file with all the damning evidence against him. I clutched the phone tightly. How? Where was it? Just like Mom said, hollowed out in a dumb fake thriller novel on his study shelf. Greg confirmed. The arrogant prick thought it was safe there. A cruel smile tugged at my lips as I pictured Dean's carefully maintained facade of lies unraveling completely. This was it, the ultimate leverage to bring him to his knees. When can I see it? I'll bring it over tonight after the girls go to bed, Greg promised. We can map out our next moves then. My chest tightened as I realized for the first time that this didn't just affect Dean and me, but Ella and Nora as well. My poor daughters, forced to watch their family crumble because of their father's selfish misdeeds. A fresh wave of anger solidified my resolve. They deserved so much better. That night, after tucking the twins in, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Greg holding a bulging manila folder. Everything's in here, he said grimly. Bank records, property transfer docs highlighting the tax fraud, and plenty of other smoking guns. We moved into the study and began spreading out the paperwork on the desk. It was damning. All right, proof of Dean's literal decades of criminality in handling his real estate holdings and investments. With this, he's going away for years, Greg stated confidently. We can completely dismantle his empire, too, once it goes public. My eyes narrowed as I formulated a final, decisive plan. It was time to make Dean pay in full. The next day, I called and arranged to meet Dean at a private lounge downtown. When he arrived, his expression was taut with resentment. "What's this about, Ariel?" he said, voice clipped. "Here to gloat over Cassidy some more?" Unflinching, I slid the thick folder across the table toward him. He eyed it warily before flipping it open. Almost immediately, his face drained of color. Where did you get this?" he sputtered, panic widening his eyes. I leaned back with a sense of supreme satisfaction. "From your dear old mother, the one you betrayed and lied to for years, just like you did to me." Dean's mouth moved wordlessly, his arrogance thoroughly punctured. For the first time, he seemed to realize the extent of the danger he was in. "What do you want?" he asked in a strangled whisper. I met his gaze levelly. "It's quite simple. You resign from all your companies and business ventures effective immediately. You write out a check to me from your remaining liquid assets for full custody of the twins, child support, and a hefty divorce settlement." His eyes flashed with anger, but the folder of evidence before him robbed him of any leverage. Dean knew I had him by the throat. You'll ruin me," he rasped. I quirked an eyebrow coolly. "That's entirely up to you, Dean. Do as I've outlined here, and this all goes away permanently. Refuse, and I'll gleefully hand-deliver copies to the DA, IRS, and every media outlet in the country." His Adam's apple bobbed with panic as he absorbed the words. For long, torturous seconds, the former titan of self-assured cunning seemed to war within himself. At last, he looked up at me with a mixture of fear and loathing. "You are one hell of a dangerous woman, Ariel Hammond." I allowed myself a thin smile. "You're just now realizing that, dear?" Dean stared at me from across the table, his fingers tightening visibly around the folder of incriminating evidence. I could practically see the calculations whirring furiously behind his eyes as he weighed his options. "Well," I prompted coolly, "are you going to play ball, or start making arrangements for a cozy prison cell?" His jaw clenched tightly, and for a moment I thought he might actually refuse my terms out of pure arrogant spite. But finally, some remnant of self-preservation broke through. Fine, he spat through gritted teeth. I'll do what you've outlined, for now. I arched an eyebrow skeptically. For now? Let's get one thing straight. There won't be any double crosses or retaliation attempts later on. If you even think about trying something, this entire folder gets publicly dumped online and shipped to the district attorney's office. Dean's nostrils flared with resentful anger, but he gave a sullen nod of acceptance. I'd succeeded in thoroughly cowing him, at least for the moment. Wonderful. I'll have the custody paperwork and financial demands drafted up by my lawyers immediately. I stood, pushing the folder back across the table. I'd hang on to that if I were you. It's your only reminder of just how dangerous I can be when crossed. With that parting remark, I turned and strode from the lounge without a backward glance. After so many years of living under Dean's shadow of deceit, it felt invigorating to grab the upper hand so decisively. Over the next few days, Dean hurried to comply with my issued demands, likely to avoid having his empire utterly obliterated. I watched with visceral satisfaction as he tendered his resignations from his various company board seats and holdings. The once high-flying real estate mogul was methodically being clipped of all his power and influence. Eventually, the coup de grace came in the form of a bank-certified check made out for a whopping $25 million, funds for my settlement and future support for the girls. Dean had been forced to liquidate a substantial share of his assets and investments. I couldn't resist the urge to needle him one last time. When he arrived to sign the final divorce papers, I remarked with mock sympathy, "Those offshore accounts you've been stashing money in sure would have come in handy right about now, huh?" Dean's expression remained stonily impassive, but his eyes closely betrayed shame and hatred. Good. Let him despise me, I thought. It was a small price to pay for justice. "When this is over, you'd better watch your back," he growled in a low, menacing tone. "No one does this to me without consequences." I laughed derisively in his face. "What, you'll sick your actress whore on me next? Don't worry, she's been a part of the consequences, too." Dean flushed an angry beet red, his hands curling into impotent fists at his sides. "You've ruined me, you hateful bye." "I've ruined you?" I cut him off with a hard slap that rocked his head to the side. "You brought this all on yourself the day you betrayed your vows, you arrogant piece of filth. Be grateful I'm not burying you in prison like you deserve." Chest heaving, I watched as he rubbed the reddened cheek and glowered at me through smoldering eyes. Pride and narcissism prevented him from ever fully acknowledging the enormity of his own transgressions. In the end, Dean silently signed the divorce papers and stormed out, utterly defeated. The mighty titan of industry and deception had crumbled to dust before my very eyes. And as I clutched the weight of that settlement check in my hands, I knew it had all been worth it. The karma he had earned through years of cheating and depravity had finally caught up to him, and I was the agent who delivered his ultimate reckoning. In the weeks following my brutal confrontation with Dean, the full consequences of his misdeeds came crashing down upon him. It was immensely satisfying to witness the mighty real estate empire he had built through deception crumble to rubble. First came the media firestorm after excerpts from the damning evidence file were strategically leaked to the press. Forensic auditors and investigative journalists eagerly pored over the reams of documentation, uncovering layer after layer of criminality. Before long, hammering headlines blared from every news channel and website: real estate tycoon Hammond embroiled in fraud scandal, offshore tax evasion and Ponzi scheme alleged, and whirlwind romance with actress Cassidy Vale revealed as sham amidst divorce. Dean's sterling professional reputation and private life lay in ashes amidst the avalanche of sordid allegations. Overnight he had transformed into a despised pariah, the latest wealthy scoundrel caught with his hand in the cookie jar. To my immense gratification, Cassidy proved just as disposable to Dean as I had been. As the smear campaign against him escalated, she issued a groveling public statement condemning his actions and swearing she had been an unwitting pawn. Her acting career was likely finished either way. Next came the legal ramifications as state prosecutors and federal agencies began circling like sharks smelling blood in the water. The IRS launched a sweeping probe into Dean's intricate offshore holdings, while the district attorney convened a special grand jury to weigh criminal indictments. It was deeply gratifying to watch Dean be hauled before the cameras in handcuffs, a haunted shell of his former cocky self as reams of charges were read aloud. Tax evasion, money laundering, financial fraud, corruption, the list went on and on. Greg beamed as we watched the proceedings unfold on television. "He's looking at a couple decades in prison if convicted on just half those counts," my brother gloated. "Good," I said through gritted teeth. "He brought this entirely upon himself. Let him rot behind bars and have plenty of time to reflect on his sins." Dean's once formidable corporate machine ground to a halt as lending abruptly froze up and contractors abandoned projects en masse. Within months, Chapter 11 bankruptcy became inevitable to avoid complete dissolution. I made sure to attend the climactic court hearing that would finalize stripping Dean of his dwindling assets and holdings. He turned toward the gallery at one point, his expression a mask of bitterness and hatred aimed squarely at me. A shiver of gratification tingled down my spine. "I hope you're satisfied now, you vengeful harpy," he hissed acidly. "Everything I've built is destroyed, my entire life gone, all because you couldn't let go of your selfish... All because of your lies and infidelity, Dean." I shot back, causing the packed courtroom to stir. "You did this to yourself. Maybe if you'd approached me honestly years ago, instead of living a double life, things could have been different. But you chose greed and jealousy over your own family. This was your reckoning." His mouth snapped shut as my words seemed to hang in the air. Rather than hurl another retort, Dean just shook his head bitterly and turned away, slumping in defeat. I felt a grim sense of finality settle over me as I watched the court proceedings wrap up. I had utterly vanquished Dean Hammond, the man who had belittled and betrayed me for so many years. His prestigious reputation, business empire, finances, all of it was ashes now. Just a scorched path of retribution for the wasted wreckage he had made of our lives. As I walked out into the hallway, Greg pulled me into a fierce hug. "You did it, sis. You survived his abuse and had the last laugh." I hugged him tightly, overcome by the realization that my long, excruciating nightmare was finally over. Dean's ego, greed, and infidelity had sown the seeds of his own downfall, and I had harvested that poisoned crop to completion. For so many years he had held the power and control over me, but in the end, I had been the one to deliver his ultimate karma. He was the broken man now, and I was free. In the aftermath of Dean's dramatic downfall, the disconnect between my old and new reality took some adjustment. Gone were the days of yielding to his manipulation and kowtowing to his demands. I was in full command of my life once more. The divorce settlement granted me not just financial security, but the sprawling Bel Air mansion Dean had cherished as his status symbol kingdom. Watching the removal trucks haul away his belongings gave me a grim satisfaction. As his remaining properties were liquidated off for pennies on the dollar, I ensured that Ella and Nora wanted for nothing. The poor girls had suffered enough turmoil already without being additionally uprooted. Greg helped me create an investment plan that would ensure the generational wealth from Dean's disgorgement would last and continue growing. Surprisingly, I felt little bitterness over having to scrap and outmaneuver my way into this stability through the ashes of Dean's crimes. If anything, I experienced a profound sense of achievement, a hard-won victory forged through sheer resilience and the refusal to remain a doormat any longer. My daughters could grow up now witnessing the full extent of my inner steel. As the months passed and Dean's legal proceedings saw him ultimately convicted on a laundry list of charges, I felt a certain melancholy creep in. This man I had once loved and built a family with had allowed ambition and ego to corrupt his character beyond redemption. The 20-year sentence handed down was almost merciful in my mind. Dean would exit prison well into his 60s, forced to re-enter society as a disgraced pariah, an all-too-fitting punishment for the utter devastation he had wrought through his own selfish vices. Any remaining concerns I'd had about his potential retaliation were put to bed when Cassidy Vale reached out unexpectedly. I met the young actress-turned-pariah at a quiet cafe, both of us still recovering from the collateral damage of Dean's ego. "I don't expect your forgiveness," Cassidy began, looking almost fraught. "What I did, getting involved with Dean despite his marriage, was reprehensible and selfish. I've had to do a lot of self-reflecting since then. I regarded her coolly but remained silent, allowing her to continue unprompted. Dean swore up and down that your relationship was over, that you were just going through the logistical motions of separating. Obviously, that was just another one of his lies to reel me in. She shook her head with obvious disgust. By the time I realized I'd been conned, he had already moved on to the next thrill. Cassidy drew in a deep, steadying breath. Anyway, I'm not asking for your friendship or trust. I simply wanted you to know that during his sentencing, Dean made it crystal clear he has no intention of ever attempting retaliation against you or your family. You've beaten him completely, Ariel. You won. I felt a sense of validation wash over me. Dean had finally been forced to face full accountability for his callous actions. Whatever rage and indignation he may have harbored was permanently frozen behind bars. As Cassidy stood to leave, she offered a parting sentiment that caught me off guard. This whole experience showed me that which defining trait I'd lacked, a moral compass. You may have destroyed me temporarily, but it allowed me to rebuild myself with more integrity. For that, you have my enduring respect. She was already heading for the door before I could formulate a response. I watched her depart, realizing the excruciating journey had forged an uniquely shared perspective between us, survivors of the same narcissistic sociopath. In the days that followed, I found my thoughts returning to the torrent of pain and anguish I had endured at Dean's hands over the decades. But where resentment and anger previously existed, a strange sense of pity began to take root. Despite the most harrowing chapters, the path had still led me here, to rebirth, redemption, and a future of possibilities. Dean, in contrast, would be eternally shackled to the depravity of his sins, banned from the luxuries and influences he had so coveted. Just another number in the system. His is a fate he had meticulously crafted for himself. Armed with the perspective of my nightmarish trials, I resolved to pay my deliverance forward. I would establish a foundation to aid defrauded victims of underhanded real estate practices, a home for others who had narrowly escaped the talons of men like Dean. This would be the first chapter of my new life's journey. I had survived the tempest of Dean's egocentric avarice and emerged both triumphant and fundamentally reborn. The future was a blank slate, and I had every intention of writing a legacy rooted in righteousness this time.